Today, I have another book review, and this book is called Cave in the Snow in English, but I read the Korean version of it because it was available at our local Korean bookstore in Koreatown, Los Angeles. And, well, it's in English, it's Cave in the Snow. Well, by the title, you can't really get much, but the Korean title for this book is I Will Become a Buddha with a Female Body. And kind of a bold book name, right? And so when I picked this book up, I thought it was going to be about largely about the feminine perspective of being a Buddhist and being a practicing Buddhist as a female. And so I started reading, and there were two early disappointments with this book, uh, which all got kind of remedied at the end. But the first disappointment to me was that this book was not written by the person this book is talking about. So this book is about the Buddhist monk Tenjin Palmo, and she is from the UK, but decided to become a Tibetan Buddhist. And she got the name Tenzin Palmo and was in around like it was very early adulthood. She went to India and parts of the Nepal to be a properly ordained Buddhist monk. And but anyway, the author of this book met her after her time in the cave, which is going to be important later. Um, and then she was so moved by this monk's life. She was like, "Can I write a book about you?" And then she was like, "Okay, sure." And that's how this book came about. So what that does for the book is it reads more like a Netflix documentary rather than like an autobiographical account of all the things that happened, right? It's less about here's my perspective about blah blah blah, but it's more like she recollected in this way, and then she told me blah blah blah. So it's like a recollection of conversations with Tenjin Pamo, rather than her actual remembering an account of all these things that happened in her life. Anyway, um, that's one, and the second kind of a sort of a disappointment was it kind of went on and on about the things that you would kind of already know as a Buddhist, like what the Sangha is like, how you kind of like act, the things that you're expected to do as a Buddhist. Like it talks about a lot of the rituals and how to learn all these concepts and things like that. So I was at about the halfway point of the book, and I was like, man, this book is really not about the feminine perspective at all. And to be honest, I took a brief, break from the book because I was reading Stephen Hawking's A Brief Illustrated History of Time. And that book was a monster to read. I couldn't finish it in time, and then I returned it to the library. But I think I'm gonna have to actually buy that book because there's a lot of stuff I still need to properly learn. But anyway, coming back to this topic, I picked up the rest of the book today. I finished the rest of the half of the book in two sittings, and okay, after that, no more disappointments. This book actually is, I think, you know what? I would go as far as to say, highly recommend to all practitioners, but in particular, I think female practitioners. I think it's an excellent guide for how to practice Buddhism as a female. And now, let's really talk about some of the important things that I kind of noticed in this book. So, number one, this book is the title of the book is Cave in the Snow, right? So cave is a very important part of this book. Why is that? That's because she went into solitary retreat into the caves in the Himalayas, right? And so she spent some time in the sangha and like mingled with the people and then studied among them and then became lived the monastic kind of temple life, and then after a certain point she wanted to really retreat into herself, right? And so with the help of some villagers she found a cave that was sufficiently secluded, and but at the same time not too like far so she couldn't like get the rations and things like that. So she would meet with the person who delivered like the supplies every once in a while, like every few months or something. But the rest of the time she would just be kind of like taking care of herself, right? And I think she did this for 12 years, and but so that's what it says on the book. So I thought it was like 12 years of solitary training, but it's less extreme than that. She had limited contact with the people for the many years, but then she had multiple periods of extended times where she would go into solitary kind of meditation, and I think the book was saying the last 3 years were in complete isolation, and she I think she also farmed some things and then was able to get a little bit of the food. Also, she didn't eat a lot because like that's what being in going into this really large retreat is like, right? You're giving up a lot of things that make up your consciousness so that you can actually focus on the consciousness itself. So, because yeah, when you have to eat every day, you have to eat delicious meals every day. You have to eat 3 meals every day, and you have to sleep a certain amount of hours, and then you have to, the more these like things that you have to do to supplement your life, the less time you actually have to kind of really deep dive into yourself, right? Because every time you have to keep think about you, every time you have some um burning desire to go deep into yourself, you're hungry and then you have to break meditation. Every time you feel like you get some kind of attraction in your meditation, oh, you have to sleep, right? So when you cut off sleep, when you cut off health, when you cut off meals, it's it sucks, and she doesn't deny that it sucks, but at the same time it gives you sort of a clarity because you get to understand, oh wait, this thing called health, this thing called eating, this thing called like a comfort and sleep, it's not really a necessity in constructing the consciousness, right? And so as long as you have some amount that you can use to sustain yourself, it's okay. And with the reduction, with the removal of all these distractions, she can really focus in on the meditative kind of pursuit. But um, it came to an her time in the cave came to an abrupt end because there was a immigration issue. So the Indian border people, the ICE of India, I guess, they found out that she was overstaying her visa, and so she needed to be ejected from the country. And so she wanted to stay for longer, but then her practice was kind of broken because of external influences. But many people would be very disappointed and perhaps angry at the situation, but she just kind of took it as like, okay, so this is how it ends. And she just asked for a bit of leniency so that she can get her affairs in order and then she can leave again. But anyway, she got the time and she left the the cave, and the she reconnected with her Western roots in Italy, and she noticed that there were some females who wanted to be Buddhist nuns, or actually Buddhist monks in Italy, but then they didn't really get the support. Because why? Kind of embarrassing thing for Buddhism. Um, Buddhism isn't really all that female oriented, right? When you go to the temples, you practically everyone you see will be males, right? And so because of that, there's not a lot of support for female monks in Buddhism, and this is across all the kind of different flavors of Buddhism. The kind of this is kind of cool, but Korean Buddhism is one of the few Buddhist traditions that allow for female monks instead of like nuns as like supporting roles, right? But when you go to Tibet or when you go to Theravada kind of traditions, you first of all in Theravada you can't even be a proper bhikkhuni. You can't you can't really be recognized as a monk. And moreover, like even in some traditions where where you're able to be ordained as a female, uh, you still have to line up behind the men, right? So like Buddha claimed everybody can be happy, but there's these all these like reasons. I mean, there's all these discriminations against females in the Buddhist world, and why that is largely due to the historical and cultural development of post Buddha's death India, and after Buddha passed away, Buddhism was again a minority religion because of Hinduism, and then India had this whole thing with the Muslims, and then so there was a time where India was largely governed by Muslim forces, and then when India slowly gathered its independence back, it again largely became a Hindu kind of a thing, and when it was under Muslim rule, a lot of Buddhist monks died, and then they were forced to convert into, either return to the secular world or convert into, Muslim. And because of that, Buddhism kind of like died, and along with it, like the traditions that the Buddha had. And but the sutras also do record that Buddha was not fervently in favor of female monks, and the interpretation of that is so when he delivered the dharma to many females expressed interest in becoming a Buddhist monk. They wanted to leave their home, they wanted to leave society, and then become a monk like Buddha did. And the most noteworthy of this was Buddha's own family. And his birth mother had passed away shortly after he was born, but the mother who raised him was his aunt, like the sister of the birth mother, right? And so after Buddha attained Buddhahood and then gave the Dharma to the family members, they also wanted to become monks. So Buddha declined, but he approved it after a certain point. And that certain point, I talk about this in one of my India pilgrimage videos, is when he came to Vaishali. Why this is important is Vaishali is kind of like the San Francisco or Seattle or Portland. It's the kind of the progressive and liberal capital of India at the time, northern India at the time. Why this is important is in the Indian culture, females always belonged to men. So when they were growing up, they belonged to the father. They were kind of like property. And after they got married, they were owned by their husband. And after the husband dies, they were owned by the son. So that means if you don't have an owner, you are sort of free property. It sounds super fucked up and it kind of is, but that was the, dominating culture back then, right? And with that, if Buddha was like, you know what, yeah, like let's all go for it. You guys can all be monks. Then what was gonna happen is, from the world's point of view, these are women without owners. Therefore, a lot of easy target for forced crimes and sexual assault and things like that, right? And so the reason why Buddha approved the Buddhist monks as females in Vaishali is because Vaishali was progressive enough to recognize that, hey, perhaps females aren't property; they are humans like men, right? And so this is the majority of the account, but there's an interpretation that goes like, there was a student of Buddha called Ananda, and Ananda had he pled and pled, and hey, well, Buddha, please, we should please, they're asking you so desperately, and then Buddha had no choice but to acquiesce and say yes, and therefore, um, the proponents of abolishing the female monks in Buddhism say, no, Buddha didn't want this. It was Ananda who really like bugged Buddha about it, and therefore it's right that we abolish the female monk system again. And so that's a kind of an embarrassing story, right? And the reality is, it still is kind of like that in Thailand and in other Theravada countries. Female monks, they can't be monks, and so they shave their head. They wear the kasha, but the doesn't matter. Officially they are not ordained, and they are still considered followers, and so that's the whole context behind being a female monk, right? And now the interesting thing about this is that, well, okay, let me finish this cave story first. So she Tenjin Palmo, her goal now that she had experienced Italy was to create a monastery exclusively for Buddhist female Buddhist nuns, female Buddhist monks, and also have an educational system where they can catch the female monks up to speed so that they can have a cultural kind of a deep religious experiences that are kind of more catered towards for female monks, because there are some specific needs that the female body has, right? For example, menstruation, and for example, physically kind of weaker body, and hormone effects and things like that, right? So these things in the traditional Buddhist communities, it's not really well maintained, right? Because why? There's no reason for it to be well maintained. So that's her primary goal, and the reason why she's engaging in a lot of public speaking events and a lot of Dharma talks is to fundraise for that. But her ultimate goal, after she's done with the fundraising, regardless of how long that actually takes, she wants to go back into the cave. And so talking about the cave first, is the cave necessary? And many people think that, to actually attain, Buddhahood, you have to spend some solitary time. You have to do some of these like hardcore kind of things where, the Bodhidharma, he's famous to have ripped his eyelids open, right? Because he got tired of sleeping during meditation. So that's why when you look at the Bodhidharma paintings, he always looks like this, right? Because it's to indicate that he ripped his eyelids off, and and then there's another Buddhist monk, and I think this is explained in the Flower Garland Sutra stories, that he sat for such a long time that he became one with the trees, and the mosquitoes and flies stopped biting him because he became one with nature, blah blah blah. So there's lots of stories like this, but is it really necessary, right? This gives kind of a mystique kind of a perspective into the awakening experience, Buddhahood. But thing is, I think it definitely helps, right? Because you're less distracted when you are away from society, when you're secluded, and you put yourself in extreme situations. So yes, having access to a cave, of course, it doesn't hurt. And even if you have access to a cave, your willpower in not escaping it is going to be, it's going to take a lot out of you, and that, I think, is very distinctively meaningful. But that is not to say that kind of a practice is superior, inherently superior in attaining Buddhahood compared to living in society with other people. I don't think that's the case. So, in essence, I think what I'm trying to communicate to you is that Buddhahood sort of requires a cave, but that cave doesn't necessarily have to be a physical place. You need to seek refuge inside a inner cave that can happen to coincide with an actual physical cave, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical cave. So that's one thing. And the second thing to discuss in this book is, of course, the sex part, right? And it's what's interesting about Tenjin Palmo is that she doesn't really care. So this isn't to say that she doesn't care about female rights. This is to say she really just kind of transcended, the gender binary from day one. Okay, so I can't practice, just because I'm a woman. I don't care. And oh, I can't. I'm not supposed to do that because I'm a female. Too bad. This is kind of her attitude towards a lot of the limitations. And so when other people would be too shamed or too embarrassed or conscious to participate in ceremonies because she's a female, doesn't care. And this kind of like I don't give a shit kind of an attitude is very well depicted in the book. And to be honest, I think that kind of is the way to go for a truly Buddhist kind of a mindset, right? We could talk and we could sit down and talk about gender all day, but then if we don't recognize that gender is a construct, much like all the other things, we are all, after all, a human, right? With a certain kind of a chromosome that gives us a natural biological, disposition for something. So this isn't to say I also don't care about gender. This is more about we have to respect gender, but we have to also respect it while recognizing that it is a construct, right? We cannot um, build we cannot base our practice on our default settings or configurations that was given to us because of a gender. We have to think bigger than our gender. So that means as the majority of Buddhist practices are male oriented, there has to be some kind of change in that so that it can apply globally to females as well. Now, instead of having this diverging path of like males should do this and females should do this, I think in the true Buddhist spirit, we have to meet in the middle way and come up with the way to do everybody does this, right? But um we but for that we have to first recognize that many of the practices again are really male oriented, and we have to really sit down. We have to, I mean, as Buddhists, we have to have a sit down with all the monks and regardless of gender, and we need to have an open discussion about how to address some of these things. And there are like specific references to why it's difficult as a female. Um, and I'm not gonna mention all of those in here simply because I can't locate them in the book because I didn't highlight them. But another thing that I want to talk about in terms of gender is that there's a lot of talk about sex, the activity in this book. Why? Because in Tibetan Buddhism there is a tantric practice, right? And so tantric practices include sex, and when you look at the tankas, right, the painting Buddhist paintings in the Tibetan tradition, you'll see some of them tend to be erotic, and so it is mentioned in the book that one of her early teachers of Tibetan Buddhism offered to have sex with her, and she didn't take that, to be like, "Wow, what a creep." She just simply denied. I don't want to do that, right? And so she goes in the book to kind of like defend that because it is a vital part of practicing Tibetan Buddhism. Moreover, we can't keep thinking about like sex and the pursuit of sex as this like, oh my god, it's only lust, right? Because in the end, what is Buddhism all about? Everything is a construct. Everything is inherently void of characteristics, and all characteristics are bound by perspective and context, right? Therefore, sex, yeah, majority of the time a monk, pursuing sex, bad, right? But in the true Buddhist sense, nothing is truly bad, right? So, in the Flower Garland Sutra, there is a mention of a bodhisattva, which is like a semi-god in other religion, demigod. There's a bodhisattva who can avatarize herself in the form of a prostitute. And then, when males in suffering come to seek, nirvana, she can offer it. She can offer the dharma, right? She can offer the wisdom of the dharma in sexual communication. So this is kind of like how really Mahayana Buddhism and the concept of the ultimate void sees sex, right? Like, yeah, of course, in society, when we force it upon other weaker people, when we force sex against people who don't want it, it's definitely a way to harm another person. It's definitely a, way to invite suffering into your life. But at the same time, once after a certain point, and we talk about the ultimate void of everything, we have to also recognize and acknowledge that sex can be beneficial for the pursuit of dharma too. But what happens? It becomes a justification, right? This becomes like, oh my god, I'm gonna, masturbate 10 times a day because it's gonna give me more clarity. Why? And that's the tough part about Buddhism, right? It's after a certain point, it becomes really difficult to kind of like separate. Is this really in pursuit of the wisdom, or is this really kind of like, am I making excuses for my comfort? So, um, there's a lot of examples in Buddhism that are like the Flower Garland Sutra story that I gave, right? But so here's the thing: there's a lot of stories that have a lesson about males pursuing sex and females willingly giving it. But you can really tell that this is a male dominated kind of a perspective because there is no mention of a vice versa. If there is, please let me know. If there is a Buddhist sutra about a female, desperately seeking sexual pleasure, um, without the profession of being a prostitute. There are multiple, accounts of, the Buddha encountering prostitutes. But if there is an anecdote, if there is a sutra about a female who is not a prostitute seeking, sexual pleasure, and then a male offering it to her, then you know what? I think I stand corrected. But as of right now, like that's just some of the ways that we can see that there is some work to do in terms of really Buddhist being a free gender kind of a religion. And one thing I forgot to mention in the early Buddhist female monks is that even when Buddha said yes, there were a lot of people who still wanted to pursue these monks, right? Because they were often in isolation, they were often alone in the forest, so it was really good. It was a good opportunity. It's easy for them to be assaulted, right? So, one there's an anecdote of a guy who keeps following a Buddhist female monk, and then he's like, oh my god, you have the most beautiful eyes, and like I really love your beautiful eyes, and wouldn't you spend the night with me? And the monk replies like, oh, you find my eyes to be really beautiful? And it's like, yes, I would give you the whole world because those eyes are so beautiful. And so she rips her eyes out and then gives it to him. It's like, hey, you said it was so beautiful, so why don't you have it? And then the guy got scared and ran away. So again, um very extreme and typical of Buddhism, but that is, what that's sort of the things that we're dealing with. And now, there was something else I wanted to mention in this book, but I kind of forgot. But anyway, the title of this book in Korean, I will become a Buddha, in the in a woman's body. It's and when I first read the title, I thought it was about like one person's determination to reach Buddhahood in this life as a female, right? But near the end of the book, it gives you a little bit more context, and the context is the full mention of the title goes like this: regardless of how many lifetime it actually takes for me, I want to attain Buddhahood in a female body. And I think that it's a nuanced difference, but I think it's a very big difference, right? And with the things that I said, there are lots of things, there are lots of assignments in the Buddhist world when it comes to gender equality, I think. And just like how in the world of northern India, there are still a lot of archaeological works to do for the Buddhist holy sites, right? So Buddhism is a religion that is constantly, I think, in development, and while the concept of the Dharma and the liberation from suffering, while that remains constant, we kind of have to carry the torch to make it more culturally um, adapted for us, because the Dharma is free flowing and Dharma has no form, right? So it's up to us to interpret the Dharma and translate it into the current cultural context. And so, with that, I think this is an excellent book to learn more about number one, Tibetan Buddhism, and number two, Buddhism in particular, and number three, about the role of gender in training and practicing Buddhism. And my favorite quote, there were so many different quotes that I liked, so I don't have a. Actually, I have one quote I have had. So in case you're still watching, my OBS, the software that I use to record these videos, I forgot to enable the pause button, so you're gonna have to sit with me for a little bit while I find the quote. Well, I can't find it. When I do find it, I will leave it as a comment.